Meghan has got no real income anymore. She's finished.
Right.
The Netflix series is over. There's no great podcast. They don't generate any money. And I don't see where she is going from here. I think she has a major problem.
Your sister, your half-sister, has just lost her $100 million Netflix contract. What do you think?
Okay. So this just got uncomfortable in a way I don't think anyone was expecting. Meghan Markle didn't get canceled. She didn't even get dragged. Something way worse happened. The world kind of shrugged. Her Netflix show slipped out, slipped away, and Netflix didn't even bother pretending it mattered. And while that quiet disengagement was happening behind the scenes, Prince Harry was unraveling in a courtroom, emotionally spiraling in a place where no one could edit or protect him. This story isn't about hate. It's about what happens when relevance fades quietly. Okay, so here's where this gets messy fast. Meghan Markle didn't lose relevance because people turned against her. She lost it because people stopped reacting altogether. And for a celebrity brand built entirely on emotional engagement, that silence is terrifying. Her Netflix lifestyle show arrived, existed, and then quietly disappeared from the conversation without backlash, without defense, and without Netflix even pretending it needed an explanation. No outrage cycle. No misunderstood vision tour. Just nothing. And honestly, that's the bombshell. Because in streaming, failure isn't always loud. Real failure drifts. Projects that matter get protected. They get reframed, pushed, defended, and repackaged. This one didn't. The platform didn't argue for it. Executives didn't champion it. Promotion didn't ramp up. The energy cooled almost immediately, like belief had already expired before the audience even arrived. That's not cancellation. That's emotional clockout. What made it stranger was how hard the show leaned into warmth, vulnerability, and intimacy, while the reaction on the other side was complete indifference. Viewers weren't angry enough to criticize. They weren't invested enough to defend it. They just scrolled. And for an algorithm built on retention, indifference is fatal because there's nothing to optimize against. No controversy, no momentum, no curiosity loop, just a flat emotional response. Now here's the part nobody expected. While Meghan's relevance was quietly thinning in corporate meeting rooms, Prince Harry was doing the exact opposite in a courtroom. Instead of legal precision, he brought unresolved emotion. Not strategy, but accumulation. Every answer felt less like argument and more like release. Watching him wasn't uncomfortable because it was dramatic. It was uncomfortable because it was uncontained in a space that doesn't allow narrative framing. And suddenly, the contrast was glaring. On one side, vulnerability that felt curated and resolved before we ever touched it. On the other, emotion spilling without filters, without music cues, without edit protection. That's when the story cracked open into something much bigger than a Netflix show or a lawsuit, because once people felt that contrast, they couldn't unfeel it, and the way they interpreted everything that followed shifted quietly but permanently. So let's walk through what actually happened, because the timeline matters here. Meghan's Netflix show didn't arrive to scandal or hype. It arrived softly. There wasn't a wave of curiosity driving people to check it out. There wasn't controversy fueling conversation. It just landed, and almost immediately something felt off. There was no second wave promotion, no executive interviews explaining the vision, no repositioning when engagement failed to ignite. Inside streaming platforms, belief shows up as speed. If a project sparks confidence, it gets defended aggressively. Talking points get circulated, meetings revolve around saving it. With this one, conversations moved on fast, not because it offended, but because nobody knew how to answer a simple question anymore. Who is this for right now? And once a platform can't answer that, urgency disappears. Viewers noticed it too, even if they couldn't articulate why. The show didn't feel dangerous or polarizing. It felt emotionally misaligned. At a time when people are overwhelmed, juggling real stress, and craving authenticity with edges, the presentation felt too polished, too resolved. Vulnerability arrived perfectly framed, emotionally concluded, and packaged for consumption. Nothing felt unfinished enough for the audience to sit with. That's when royal biographer Tom Bower added a layer that changed everything. He didn't accuse Meghan of lying. He didn't question her experiences. He questioned the timing and delivery. According to Bower, the issue wasn't truth, it was emotional frequency and fatigue. Viewers weren't rejecting the feelings, they were exhausted by how precisely they were being presented. And this wasn't about hostility, it was about instinct. When vulnerability arrives without friction, audiences pull back. Not in anger, in doubt. Authenticity isn't just honesty, it's hesitation, it's awkwardness, it's unresolved tension. And the show offered none of that. Everything was explained, everything was contextualized. Nothing lingered. Meanwhile, while this quiet disengagement unfolded behind closed doors, Prince Harry entered the courtroom, and instead of methodical legal answers, he brought years of accumulated resentment. Not rage, but heaviness. Each response felt personal, layered, emotionally dense. The judge eventually had to redirect him, reminding him that court isn't the place to emote. And watching that moment made something snap into focus for a lot of people, because suddenly the difference between curated vulnerability and unfiltered emotion became impossible to ignore. And this is where the internet response gets really interesting, because it wasn't explosive. There wasn't a single viral outrage moment. Instead, commentary shifted tone. People weren't angry, they were observational. Jokes started landing not because they were cruel, but because they felt accurate. Viewers pointed out how forced the friendships looked, how the warmth felt rehearsed, how moments that should feel spontaneous came across sterile. And that kind of critique hits harder because it's not fueled by hate. It's fueled by recognition. People started saying the same thing in different ways. This doesn't feel lived, it feels managed. And once that perception takes hold, it colors everything. Even moments meant to feel intimate get reinterpreted as performance. Some defended her, of course. They argued that not everything needs to be raw chaos to be real, that boundaries exist, that privacy matters. And that's fair. But even many supporters admitted something felt off emotionally, like they were being guided toward a specific reaction instead of discovering it themselves. The late-night commentary didn't help either. When comedians joke about a show, it usually fuels interest. In this case, it didn't. The humor landed because it echoed what viewers were already sensing. Not malice, just awkwardness. The terrified friend energy, the overly curated domestic moments, the lifestyle guru, positioning that didn't align with where Meghan currently sits culturally. And then there was the Netflix silence. No clapbacks, no clarification, no defense. And that silence spoke volumes. Because if the platform believed deeply in the project, it would have said something, anything. Instead, it let the conversation drift. Meanwhile, Harry's courtroom appearance generated the opposite response. People didn't mock him. They felt unsettled. His emotional intensity felt real in a way the show hadn't. Not comfortable, not polished, but undeniably human. And that contrast reshaped perception retroactively. Viewers began asking questions they hadn't before. If this is what uncontained emotion looks like, what had everything else been? That question didn't spark outrage, it sparked reevaluation. And once that happened, the narrative shifted from individual projects to pattern recognition, and the story stopped being about one show and started becoming about control. To understand why this hit so hard, you have to zoom out. This wasn't one isolated moment. Over years, a rhythm formed. Emotional revelations released at precise intervals. Confessions carefully framed, followed by silence until the next controlled disclosure. Nothing accidental, and at first, that worked. But over time, predictability replaced discovery. Audiences don't reject vulnerability because it's too much. They pull away when it starts to feel scheduled. When emotion arrives pre-processed, pre-approved, and emotionally resolved, it stops creating tension. Without tension, there's no engagement, and without engagement, relevance thins quietly. This is why the so-called second season announcement raised eyebrows. It didn't feel like renewal, it felt administrative, as if momentum was being simulated rather than earned. And that matters because institutions don't sever ties dramatically anymore. They loosen them, they delay, they stop prioritizing. Decline doesn't arrive as rejection, it arrives as optionality. Tom Bower's framing lands here again. Not collapse, detachment, a system no longer organizing itself around your presence, no villain to fight, no decision to appeal, just delayed replies and soft deferrals. Let's circle back. Those phrases sound harmless, but they're endings. And this wasn't unique to Meghan. It taps into a broader cultural fatigue. Audiences are tired of being told how to feel. They recognize curated sadness the same way they recognize curated joy, and once they sense emotional management, empathy shuts down quietly. Harry's courtroom moment crystallized that fatigue. It showed what emotion looks like without production, without framing, without protection, messy, unresolved, and uncomfortable. And once audiences saw that, they couldn't go back to consuming vulnerability as content without questioning it, which brings us to the unavoidable conclusion of this entire saga. So here's the real takeaway, and it's not about Meghan being finished or Harry being broken. It's about what happens when authenticity gets engineered, because no matter how sincere the emotion is, once the audience feels guided instead of invited, the connection weakens. This wasn't a dramatic collapse. There was no final scandal, no cancellation headline. What happened was quieter and far more damaging. The audience stopped needing explanations. Platforms stopped defending. Urgency evaporated. And once that happens, relevance doesn't vanish. It thins. Each appearance carries less weight. Each response lands softer. The irony is that the most human moment in this entire saga didn't come from a streaming show. It came from a courtroom, a place with no music cues, no editing, no control, just raw frustration spilling into a space built for precision. That moment didn't restore sympathy, it reframed everything, and that's why people are still watching. Not out of loyalty or hostility, but curiosity. Watching relevance dissolve without conflict. Watching a narrative lose control of its reception. That's unsettling in a uniquely modern way. If Meghan and Harry pivot again, it won't be about more vulnerability. It'll be about friction, hesitation, letting moments stay unresolved. Because authenticity can't be forced. It has to feel discovered. Now, I want to know what you think. Do you feel like the audience quietly checked out? Or do you think this story still has a genuine second act? Let's talk.